read his first poetry collection called Because Sadness is Beautiful. And do we have any Zim dancehall fans in the building? So the book was came out last week, correct? Yes, last week. It's called Zim Dancehall, The Revolution. Right? Yes, so you can ask him all about that. Okay, please join me in welcoming Dr. Tanaka Chidora.
Point of correction. I was already at Dr. Tanaka Chidora when I joined the Harare Book Club. Yeah, but that doesn't matter. Call me Tanaka. I actually hate the doctor part. I'm going to read 3 poems. One from my collection, which was published in 2019, titled Because Sadness is Beautiful. The poets who have come before me have spoken about fathers. So I want to read a poem about a father. The person who asked me to write that poem is Memory Harare, because fathers, let's think about songs that talk about fathers. Usually they are villains. Now let's think about songs that talk about mothers. They are cliches. So when Memory asked me to write a poem about a father, that's when I discovered how difficult it is to write about a father. It's easier to say he comes home late, and when he arrives, people run away. They scuttle for cover. I'm a father now. I don't want to see my kids running for cover when I get into the house, even when I'm drunk. Because I'm at my most generous when I'm drunk. So, I'm going to read a father poem on page 113 of Because Sadness is Beautiful. And before I read, our only cow for the duration of my childhood was called Bata. That was her name, so she is going to feature in this poem. Father, tumnyaradze mudakuvaka. I remember his voice flying in the moonlit night, heralding his arrival from a drinking stint in the next village, which necessitated 2 types of responses that divided the homestead into 2 countries. The delight of the dogs at hearing the master's arrival, and a funeral silence enveloping the kitchen hearth, everything scuttling for cover, including the voices of the children. John 14, verse 1, verse 1, John 14, verse 1, verse 1, moyo yevatendi ngairege kumanikidzwa, tendaiwo kuna baba, mutende nekwandiri, verse 1. Then a brief silence, during which he would probably be wondering whether to preach or castigate the witches and phantoms that stood in his way and fought against his progress in life. I see father staggering into the kitchen hearth and taking all outstanding issues head on, like why I was still clumsy with the plow when Taonga was already holding it with one hand and directing the cattle with another, or why mother was in the habit of hiding his hard-earned coins and depriving him of a few moments of joy with Chegobo and friends, or why this regime of vegetables and sadza always coincidentally installed itself on happy days like this one. I hear father's voice in the morning summoning me to the kettle pen to milk Bata, our very gentle cow, who was always in the habit of throwing old decorum to the wind every time I was involved in the milking process. So that one day, throwing all patience away, she pierced my Adidas shorts with her horn and threw me into the air like a rag to have me land accurately and head first into the pail of milk that father had coaxed from her breast. I remember the day perfectly because the previous night father had come home with another forehead on his head and mumbled something about a fight involving himself and Sekru Givot. So for the pains of being thrown into the air by a gentle cow, I received a hiding, during which I memorized the shape his face had taken to assuage the pain that stung my backside. I remember Father raising a colossal building from the dust of the ground, uniting an army of bricks carefully like a boy playing Sudoku with numerous pieces. I hear him announcing that I'd been recruited as a darker boy and that I needed to learn a thing or two about building. Who knows, maybe one day I would have to repair the goat pen or the fowl run. I remember walking behind to our new congest. I remember hearing him barking instructions about how to mix the ingredients in order to have the perfect texture. I hear him saying that I was good with books, but what was lacking was being good with other things like mixing dagger, or holding a plow, or milking butter, our gentle cow, or harnessing the kettle, or leading the kettle. I remember Father moving to the city finally to work as a bus driver. I remember waking up every morning with pride that somewhere in this country, my father was moving around a big seat machine to the delight of his passengers. I remember how the year my father moved to the city, Christmas came with a smile on its face. There were new clothes that smelled of the city. There were biscuits that he fished from a paper bag written "OK" on the side. And there was sliced bread that looked different from the clumsy chunks that we bought from the local shops. I also remember Father building a new house of corrugated iron and converting the thatched one into a storeroom. I remember encouraging myself to grow up and become a bus driver just like Father and eat all the biscuits in the world and build a bigger house for him and Mother and more cattle and goats and chickens and a son he would be proud of. I remember Father coming from the city in a wheelbarrow. Accident was the whisper in the wind. I remember his pained and vulnerable look and how I had to hold him by the hand or push him in a wheelbarrow. How for months I prayed for him to walk again, to drive again that big machine and bring biscuits and bread and new clothes that smelled of the city. I remember how he started to walk again, tottering like a newborn calf, and sometimes landing on his buttocks after failing to brave the pain. I remember Father coming to church and telling the congregation that he was giving his life to God, and telling the shocked congregants that it was God who had saved his life. Thereafter, I see Father in a variety of postures. In that one, he's holding a hymn book and fervently singing, Dino Simuda She Famba Inen. And yet another one, he's in control of a funeral program and everyone is listening to him. I see Father holding my newborn baby, holding him closely to his chest with a lot of emotion, scrutinizing his face for a sign of himself. A nose that stays down at the mouth maybe, or eyes that stare furtively at you while sizing you up with camera eye precision. I used to see Father every time I closed my eyes, but these days, even without closing them, I see him, because I too have become a father. Thank you. The second poem is from my newest poems, and I usually write my poems by utilizing the inspiration that comes from my surroundings. So if I live here, I'll write a poem about here. But for now, I live in Chitungwiza, and this poem is about a broke fellow. He is really broke, but he wants some beer, and he knows his neighbor is capable of buying beer. So every time he goes to his neighbor's house and they're drinking together, he tries to please his neighbor because the neighbor is loquacious. It's titled, Sitting on the Veranda and Drinking Opaque Beer. My neighbor loves to call himself my brother, and many an evening like today calls me over to his house where we drink opaque beer from plastic tumblers and chat about the weather, God, money, women, and our neighbors. People are evil, he says while wiping off dredges of beer from his lips. They are not like you and me. We are brothers, yes? The beer is reasoning for me with ease, so I have no problems with this question. Yes, we are brothers, I reply, feeling happy with myself and my brother. A noisy mosquito threatens to spoil the evening. So I squash it between my palms and wipe the blood that remains on my khakis. These ones. These buggers need a mosquito net or a mosquito coil. My brother neighbor replies. Yeah. I reply while pouring another round into the tumblers. He is my brother, I tell myself. And I can tell him anything. Like how we had a quarrel in my house about silly things like toothpaste, beer, cigarettes, and relatives. I feel the confessions coming to my forehead, knocking and knocking until, finding an opening line, I let them tumble out. You know, we will never understand women. I begin. Thank you. I'm also currently working on a collection of Shona poems. I started writing Shona poetry during the lockdown. Persona I usually go for is a retired pensioner who lives in the village and drinks opaque beer at the veranda of a bottle store. Not Giera doesn't own a bottle store because bottle stores are owned by someone and Sons. So it's usually Why Not and Sons or some other funny names, you know. So I use these voices because I grew up with them. And the poem I'm gonna read for you is how these voices sounded to me when they were performing grief. After losing someone in the village, these voices would perform some kind of grief. And how they sounded to me is what I try to capture in this poem. It's a Shona poem titled Tichibwereketa pamusoro pokuinda kwake. Asi chikushunga asadero. Handiti vhiki yapera pano taitoredza zvibatani muna mutirikwi. Akatonditi baba pedzi wemisi dzangu dzapera ndipevo nhatu. Ndikatoseka naye ndichiti kasuri kuita dzokurya kai. Takatozovirigwa tiri paposto iye kurubata gore kunonzi kune njuzu kwaivhira zvibatani zvokuti heki. Tikabva ikoko zvisaga zvedu zvisingafemi tikatorangana kuti pabwaizodigwa bwe kwakinasiyo taisongana. Izo kanditso chikuswa iva nemapurani ake. Imi mutori nani makaonana naye vhiki yapera? Ini zuro pano ndaitova naye kumabagwe ehurufia. Tikatotengerwa mabhotoro nemwana waZeti uya mukomana anoshanda kwaMubviti. Ndichitoseka naye chikusu ndichitoti mhazha yako chikusu kufanana nebhotoro rawakabata. Handina kumbohwa paakamboti pane paiti nye. Aingova chikusu hwekuhwereketa zvinosetsa zvokubudisa misodzi. Nhasi mangwana ndopo ndoona gotwe rake richiuya richifemereka kwai baba hakuchina. Tambobvunza kuti hakuchina vainda dhorobheni here kwavaiti vachandotsvaka mbeu nefotereza zvikanzi bodo. Hakuchina chikwanda wangu chamboko pamoyo. Ko ndicho chii chinai chikusu bhururu? Zvachikusu here? Indaiva naye zuro. Asi matauriro akaita zvaiva nechirevo. Akati chii naye sekuru Ekiwa. Chikusu akati chii? Sekuru Ekiwa vachidzungudza musoro. Chinguva chizvarigwe changu haisati ndambohwa munhu mupenyu achihwereketa mashoko akadero. Natanaka Chidora kubva muna Kaso Gwara zvekare. Richazobuda kana ndapedza kunyora. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the week.